welcome to the Gallbladder Gurus network of social media. Um, I've got to say, I am honored and I'm so privileged that we were able to connect because, as you know, that we spoke just before that I've just turned carnivore maybe 6 months ago, maybe a little more than that. But it's been such a great blessing for me and for my gallbladder less life because I was told that I couldn't eat that kind of stuff, but yet here I am doing it. And all of a sudden, my digestive tract is very, very happy. And I went from 298 pounds, now I'm down to 245.
Mm.
So, inflammation gone. And everybody hears my stuff, my story 8 years ago. In fact, my 50th birthday, I just turned 58 yesterday. 50th birthday, I had a major gallbladder attack. Didn't know what the hell it was. I'm having all my good foods, like all the good stuff, all the fats and all the good. I'm having a really, and like 50 people over at the house. I had no, it was a surprise party for me. I felt like crap. I was having my left side hurt so bad. My pain would start in the right and immediately switch to my pancreas and over to my spleen. So just real quick, I went through a gallbladder flush in April of 2015, went into emergency surgery at the end of April, had a swollen, twice the size normal swollen spleen. When they took my gallbladder out under emergency surgery, I had 3 lymph nodes removed. My gallbladder was gangrene. I had 28, 27, 28 stones, 24, something like that. I got them anyway, by the way. Anybody wants to. So the whole idea that I had that and I had pancreatitis and a bunch of other health issues. So I was bad. And that's why I started this group. I wanted to get some good information out to people. But along my journey, as I started going through this, I was ever so struck that I had no idea of like the toxic superfoods you're talking about. I didn't know what oxalates meant. Like I told you before, I heard that term from a botanist friend of mine that I'd hired in my organic fertilizer company in '04. And I thought it was full of crap. I was like, plants are not trying to kill you. They're good for you. Look at spinach. Man, I love this stuff. So anyway, we used to get in these really heated, lively discussions. And I really thought he was nuts. He could make plants grow. I mean, we created some great fertilizers, but nevertheless, that's where I first heard about it. And then when I heard you on a podcast with Dr. Anthony Chaffee talking about weaponized plants, you got my attention. But then that one word, oxalate, and it's because it's not used that much. And all of a sudden, I'm paying attention, and it was just like I was mesmerized. I was like, wow, I have got to get her in here because I think there's a direct correlation between that, liver issues, digestive. We know that digestive issues goes along with gallbladder. So, Dr. Sally, you're not doctor. You've got a master's in public health. So she's a nutritionist with a unique specialty. She graduated with a degree from Cornell University, a master's degree in public health from UNC Chapel Hill. Congrats on that. That's pretty cool. I love Chapel Hill. She's the author of the book. You can see in the background, Toxic Superfoods. You can order it on Amazon right now or wherever, but it won't be delivered till January, dadgummit. So I was hoping I have mine at hand whenever we did this. But she's talking to you about oxalates and many other things that people will experience when eating these healthy superfoods. And you can look in the picture in the background. I mean, look, that's a beautiful picture. It really is. I mean, Swiss chard and some spinach and some beets and different things. To the public eye and to most quote unquote nutritionists, that's a great meal. To me, it would be very toxic. So, Sally, take it away. Thank you.
Well, buddy, these pretty vegetables have been on the cover of magazines and all kinds of stuff for decades now. Is like the perfect thing to eat. And when I was in school, at Cornell, the nutrition program is right across the quad from the ag program. And we never really crossed the quad, except my microbiology class was taught in the ag school. Other than that, we never learned about plants and their toxins or how to properly grow plants. Where does food come from? The whole agriculture side of nutrition and the biology of plants is just taught in Bio 101. Like you're supposed to get through that material. Who cares about that when you care about human biochemistry? Like there's no relevance, there's no context. And when you learn in school about oxalates, it's a tiny little 3-sentence paragraph that's 1 inch tall and 2 inches wide that says, for kidney stone patients, because this stuff, oxalate, it starts off as oxalic acid in nature and it binds with minerals and becomes oxalates. And the most common one is calcium oxalate. And the plants use both the acid and the calcium oxalate to defend themselves, to take care of their physiology, for their reproductive success. It's very important for their basic metabolism. They have to manage calcium. This stuff helps them do that. That's pretty relevant because it turns out that we're all exceeding our own innate capacity for exposure to this stuff because of the way we eat now.
Overload.
It's an overload. We're overloaded on the plate. We're overloaded in the produce department. We're overloaded physiologically, and it wrecks the liver. And for many people, the gallbladder too.
So in that ideology, we know that anything that affects the liver will affect its way of detoxing. And one of the ways, obviously, we'll look at is we'll hear fatty liver or we'll have congested liver because we've eaten too many carbohydrates, but it makes the bile thicker. But the reality of it is the liver's trying to get rid of even the toxicity. It's trying to get rid of it and dump it in that bile. That ends up going into the gallbladder, super saturated and creating some cholesterol stones, but some, and I do my little mozzarella, these are pigment stones. Exactly. I mean, but that's one of the they are stones.
Not a happy dance.
Yeah,
it's more of a funeral dance.
But it's one of those interesting things because mine are pigment stones. So I had too much bilirubin because I had done something really wonky to my liver. But I know now because I was on some Atarax and Ritalin before it was even a thing, that had some issues. But the foods I'm eating, right, are having an effect on that liver.
Drugs and foods are both in a position to really hurt the liver and the kidneys, the major excretion organs, but the liver does so much more for us. When you eat food, it goes to the stomach and then the small intestine and so on. There is a special circulatory system around the digestive tract called the hepatic circulatory system. It picks up everything that you absorb from your food is shunted straight to the liver. 100% of the drugs and the oxalic acid that you absorb from your your meals, your keto bread, your spinach smoothies, these are foods that are really high in oxalate. You're flooding the cells of the liver. See, the cells of the liver are it's like the blood flow is more of a bath. It's the sinusoids in the liver. These cells every element of these cells are touching and being affected by the things you absorb. So after a meal, it takes maybe 10 hours to finish absorbing the oxalic acid from your spinach smoothies and your chocolate covered almonds and your, the big ones are spinach, beets, beet greens, Swiss chard, nuts like almonds and cashews, and chocolate. Those are in the peanuts and potatoes. When we grow up on potatoes peanut butter, then we add chocolate. And so all of us tend to have too much potatoes, peanut butter, and chocolate. And then we try to get healthy, or we get bribed by our parents. If you eat your spinach, you can have ice cream for dessert.
Yeah.
You're taught from the day you drew breath that you have to have these vegetables. Sometimes sweet potatoes are the first baby solid food, and that's really high in oxalate. So we are eating a lot, and your liver is getting hit every time. So is your stomach and your intestinal tract. And the liver does not detox oxalic acid or the crystals.
Oh, really? Okay. It does not.
The body has no metabolism, no chemical way to break this stuff down. So it tends to get stuck in the liver in these invisible ways. They're called lipid crystals, and you can't scan them. You can't dye for them. It's very hard to see them on a biopsy. So we don't really have much science demonstrating how much the liver itself is becoming a site of accumulation of oxalate. But what is happening there after these very too much oxalate meals, like a spinach smoothie or a keto bread, that is causing the liver cells to defend themselves from damage. So you use up an awful lot of glutathione. All the liver cells are using up their own antioxidant capacity to protect their own existence. Because number one, you need a liver. And so in the process, you start wearing out your detox capacity. So all
Wow.
the other detox that it's supposed to be, it's not detoxing oxalate, it's just defending itself and using up its detox capacity. So your ability to defend yourself from other toxins becomes weakened with over time with this high oxalate overload that we're doing now. And of course, it ends up in the gallbladder because, as you said, the liver's producing stuff and bile is happening and you have to flush it out. The gallbladder is trying to excrete junk that wasn't allowed to get into your blood, right?
So I'm taking notes, people. You better be taking notes. Get your pencils out. So
Take your notes, because when you start digging around in the medical literature, like I did after I figured out that I had really seriously been harming my health my whole life on not knowing this and eating too many of these foods. I grew up on Swiss chard and beet greens. We loved that kind of thing. My dad loved it. It was country food, and Dad taught me to put vinegar on the greens and just love them. And I was the vegetable queen as a kid. None of my siblings liked them, but I did. And I started gardening as a 9-year-old. So I've been messing myself up. And going to Cornell didn't save me. I didn't learn anything.
Right. So you grew up vegging out.
What?
You grew up vegging out. I mean, I was a
I
term
did.
back
I
when we were
really
younger.
loved food. I was a little foodie. I was an eager eater. We go apple picking and I would eat a dozen in the trees. And in a week, I would polish off a whole bushel of apples. Like, I love to eat. And I love fresh foods. I liked, fruits and vegetables, shapes, colors, crunches, whatever. I was into it. I like flavor. I didn't really need sugar. I wanted to be nourished. I don't know. I was into it. And it didn't do me any good. I was the one kid who needed glasses. I was the one kid who this and that, always issues. And I lost my tonsils at age 5. And that probably made me very more conscious about how to eat. And so I kind of became a health nut as a little kid, because I knew inherently that the way you ate affected your health. And I had a lot of trouble with strep and things as a kid. And it's no fun to be sick when you're a kid. You learn early, if you're smart, that being sick wrecks your life. You can't do what you want to do if you're sick. You get barred from the swimming pool. That's no good. So anyway, in my research, it was interesting to find that a huge amount of gallbladder sludge is actually oxalate. I didn't know that.
Wow.
What do they call it? Sludge and something else. It's oxalate is a major component and probably much worse than people like me. Luckily, I never had gallbladder issues that I know of and got through it. But I had a friend of mine that I knew casually through yoga class complained to me in the locker room that she could not stay in the 90-minute hot yoga class because she'd have to run to the bathroom. And this was a perpetual problem for her. And I said, "Are you eating a lot of almonds or spinach or sweet potato?" She says, "Yes, every day I eat almonds." I said, "Come to my house. We're going to sit down and talk about it." And she came to my house with all her records. We looked at her records. Very interesting, because they took out her gallbladder, right? Her problem was fecal incontinence. She was having a spastic rectum and had no control over the function of her BMs at all. And she said she was having 8 to 10 fecal accidents every day for 13 years.
Holy crap. No pun intended. Wow.
Wow. How to ruin a life, and this started when her second child was only 2. And it's not good to be a mom who has to run to the bathroom and drag her 6-year-old boy into the women's room. That's embarrassing to a 6-year-old boy. He wants, it's not convenient in so many ways.
The psychological part of that.
Awful. I mean, it's just very difficult to live with. And so they took out her gallbladder and did scopes and all that, and she progressed. And I mentioned her story in the book, and I have several stories like that. It's very illustrative because she continued to get more and more problems after the gallbladder surgery, because the problem was the oxalate in her diet, it turned out. And the reason we know that is because 3 days after she came to my house and learned what to stop eating, she went full bore and just stopped with these high oxalate foods. She sent me a text I remember this moment. She says, I'm not in the bathroom. She's like,
Right.
I can't believe it. Like she's having normal bowel function in 3 days. After
Wow.
13 years of 10 accidents a day, it only took 3 days off the almonds and sweet potatoes and so on for her to regain her function. So that's interesting too, because what it tells us is that the oxalic acid in those foods were directly causing neurological damage that was functional in nature, that the function of the nerves and muscles that control the behavior of the rectum and the colon was wrecked by these high oxalate foods and was immediately restored when she quit bathing them in oxalic acid and oxalate crystals with every meal.
Wow. Wow. That's just, and it also proves the point that, in which we kind of know, but we kind of take for granted. The body wants to balance. It doesn't want to be out of balance. It wants, and take it for what it's worth. Audience is, when your body's doing that kind of thing, it's time to investigate, right? And I mean, just like you did. I mean, you investigate a little bit. Hey, remove these foods, and bingo, you hit a home run. And I tell everybody, that's one of the things that where it got me was I went old school elimination diet. Just get rid of everything, eat meat. I am 38% Norwegian, so I'm not happy eating veggies, so it didn't bother me. I could just like eat all the fish, eat all the meat. I'm happy. Eat the venison. And again, because it did psychologically, though, I had been told by so many professionals, you've got to have a balanced diet, dude. You've got to have the veggies and the fruits and this and that. You spoke of something a minute ago that was, you said the magic word of today, I say today, of our time is smoothies. There's a stand on every freaking corner. So those are not good. I know that, forget the sugar that's in it.
And the fact that it's pureed and you never have to chew.
Right.
That has its own problems. And I mentioned that there's many problems with us purifying or, blending foods and treating ourselves like invalids. But then we're liberating all these plant toxins, and we think smoothies are a way to concentrate the supposed goodness of these phytochemicals and juncola that's in plants.
Holy
smokes! Quite the opposite. It just supercharges the toxicity of the plants.
But so you did it. So I'm not stunned. I'm not surprised by any means, because of all the stuff that I've learned about gallbladders and stuff. That I'm going to do the research even deeper. But it's interesting that, so if you're on a healthy diet, you're having issues with oxalates. I'm going to assume you can throw in there phthalates and lectins and everything, and the other acids. If you've got that, your sludges, if you've got sludge, that could be a predominant thing in that sludge, or cause and effect, if you would, that's in there, and it's definitely not helping you any. So
yes, in fact, another example that I mentioned in the book are tannins, which is a type of polyphenol. We're told polyphenols are so good for us. Tannins are a disaster, and so your body's designed to disarm them. There's stuff in the saliva to disarm them, but if you're just swallowing and not chewing, that didn't work. So now your intestines will try to disarm that. If that doesn't work, the liver tries and then tries to kick it out. So the body's trying to protect you from these polyphenols called tannins. But we think we need to force the body to have them. And so we do things like with the curcumin, we're going to add black pepper to force the body to absorb a toxin that it doesn't want.
Now you're really blowing my mind, because my sons have a supplement company, and I don't know how many things I have read that, like curcumin, turmeric, you got to put black pepper with in order for your body to do it. And I've often wondered why obviously the black pepper's there because they think it's a stimulatory effect to be able to get you to uptake it. But the reality is
black pepper is toxic enough to disarm the body's self-defense against the curcuminoids.
Wow. That's crazy.
We think we're so smart, and we think we can biohack the body and tell it what to do. And we're just hurting ourselves in the process. Foolishness.
So let's talk about the last, not say last but not least, you also brought up a big word. We hear a little bit about it, glutathione and glutathionization. Talk to us about that, because interesting enough, in the DNA reports I run for if you're a client of mine, I run DNA. That's my foundation test. And I have a very, very low glutathionization in my body. So I've got to take some supplements to be able to help boost it up, because I just don't have it. I've got half of one gene and none of another that helps it. And so it's interesting though that you bring up, because I do know glutathionization is the body's way of helping detoxify. Right?
It does both. In cells, it's helping to balance what we call the redox balance, where you have the right amount of free radicals and not too many. You need a little bit of free radicals, helps to communicate, and that helps turn on the production of glutathione in cells to protect the cell and take care of the cell. So when oxalate's around, the cell has to repair when other problems are around. And just the mitochondria themselves, they'll throw off some free radicals, partly to tell the cells, hey, we're working hard here. We're going to need some antioxidants to kind of clean up the factory heat, so to speak. If you think of a mitochondria as a factory, it produces heat when it's working really hard to produce energy. And so there's a little bit of like, let's deal with the smokestack, so to speak. So you need glutathione in cells. So, and the genetics are really interesting, because there's always these redundancies in the genetics that we haven't figured out. We only know a small amount about genetics. I would guess we know 4% of what we need to know to really know what we're doing. But we always find that it's never just one gene. It's a whole family of genes managing all kinds of things, because there's this whole intelligence system where there's redundancies built in. And the problem is with things like oxalate, it's not only causing a toxicity stress for every cell that's being exposed to it, whether it doesn't even have to be at the liver. The first cells are the stomach and the lining of the intestines. And then the next cell are the blood cells in the blood that's passing through your intestines. And already they're damaged. One study showed, looking at, I think it was 40 volunteers, they gave them a spinach smoothie, and 40 minutes later, maybe it was 70 volunteers, 40 minutes after the smoothie, their circulating immune cells were damaged. So whenever you've got oxalate around, you're causing some cell damage. And this can affect the kind of damage that oxalate causes, affects how the genome gets read or not, because it's messing up calcium management in cells, because oxalate grabs calcium. And oxalate, what it does is it damages the cell membrane enough that it can just get into any cell. Now, normally the oxalic acid is an ion. That means it's a charged particle that dissolves in water. So as a water-soluble charged particle, oxalic acid would normally require a transporter in the membrane to move it from outside the cell to inside the cell, or back and forth. But with oxalate, you don't even need transporters to get in the cell, because oxalate damages membranes enough. It doesn't even have to touch the membrane to damage it. Just probably the electromagnetic force of this ion. There's something about this molecule. This is called a dicarbolic acid. It's messing up the membranes enough that it can get itself into any cell at once. And when it does that, it grabs the calcium that's doing the job of the cell inside the cytosol, and that causes the cell to take on more calcium. And so the cell starts bringing in more calcium, because its active calcium drops because it's turning into calcium oxalate. Well, then you get too much calcium in the cells, and the mitochondria start eating up the calcium, and it just starts wrecking things, and it starts killing off the mitochondria. So it's very interesting. This tiny little molecule has not been given any respect by any of us in the healthcare field and in research. We've been using it like crazy in science and using it in industry since the 1700s. It can do all kinds of things, and we're pretending we can eat whatever amount we want and get away with it, because we think we're invincible, and we have convinced ourselves that plants are innocent and benign.
Yeah, so I want to talk more about that, but real quick, we've been using it for centuries. So how was oxalate in our system for centuries?
Well, in the 1700s, it was originally understood to be something called tartar in the 1600s. and eventually got the name oxalic acid because they could isolate it. The early chemists, this is one of the first chemicals used in chemistry to figure out the molecular formulas of substances. So we've been using oxalate as in the early days of science and understanding chemistry itself. As somebody who's with a chemist background, we should have learned this in our chemistry classes. Like, how did chemistry start to learn what the elements were and how they all come together and create different molecules? Like, that's amazing how smart people were back then doing cool science in the 1600s. And so by the 1700s, we knew we could isolate it from sorrel. Salts of sorrel, it was called, because when you would dry it out, when you get this liquid from the sorrel plant, you dry it out and it would become salts, like almost like table salt. It looks like Epsom salts. So salts of sorrel coming from the oxalis plant got called oxalate, oxalic acid, because it came from a family of plants called oxalis, which is like the false shamrock plant. So, and there's other kinds of that a type of wood sorrel. All these plants named sorrel were named sorrel. That's a French term for sour. And the sourness comes from their high oxalic acid content. That's one of the things I think why we like spinach. It has this tart bite to it. It's mild and yet slightly tart. And that's the oxalic acid contributing to that tartness. So we were using the juice of sorrel as a cleaner. It started to be using in big factories producing cottons in the 1700s. So the way you prepared the fabric for dyeing, and it was a mordant to help set the dye. It'll clean wood, it cleans bleach. If you go look for ask an antique restorer about how to bleach out wood, they'll tell you oxalic acid is the best way to do that. We use it in etching and photography, so many industrial uses. We use it in the vial. If you get your blood tested for how much glucose is in your blood, the vial that the phlebotomist puts your blood sample into, it's got oxalic acid in the bottom of it because the acid interferes with the red blood cells and the white blood cells' ability to use energy. It can't use the glucose. You're trying to measure glucose. So you have to tell the cells, you're not using this glucose because we want to measure this glucose. So oxalic acid is what disarms the cell's ability to metabolize glucose right away. And it does it by binding with magnesium and other minerals in the cells, and it disarms their total sugar metabolism. We use it all the time. Science uses it to figure out how much calcium will fit in the suborganelle in a cell. They do this thing called saponin skinning, and they give oxalic acid and saponin to a cell, and it causes the cell to take on tons and tons of oxalate, and so that the calcium follows the oxalate and vice versa, and fills up. The poor cells start holding on to all this extra calcium, and then they can tell how big the organelle is because they can now picture it with, special radiology and stuff. So it's fascinating how much we know and don't know about oxalic acid.
But we have it underneath our counter, though, right?
In Barkeeper's Friend, the powder.
That one got me because as soon as I was actually watching. I think you were doing Nutrition with Judy, and you were talking about it. And my wife was using her Barkeepers, and she literally was like, she goes, "No way!" Turn around, look, and she goes, "And I eat this stuff." I said, "Yeah." Every time you eat almonds, every time you eat, your spinach, every time you eat your sweet potato, your chocolate. And she goes, "How the hell do we not know this?"
Hopefully she's wearing gloves, because if you use it too often,
yeah.
Good. But because you can give yourself arthritis using Barkeeper's Friend every day.
Oh my gosh.
This stuff destroys your connective tissue. It sucks the minerals out of your bones.
And you're talking about oxalates. You haven't even broached into the phthalates and the lectins, which are all in the kind of the same plant system.
There's so many chemicals in plants. And I spent 3 years researching all of them, and every one of them causes gut damage. Every one of them. So really, the one that's really getting us is oxalate more than any. Now, I think lectins are particularly bad for us hippy dippy types who tried to be vegetarian and ate a lot of beans. Because if you don't properly soak your beans for 3 days and then pressure cook them really hot, The lectins aren't disarmed. See, the difference between oxalate and lectins and phytates is that you can't disarm oxalates in plants. You
Right.
can if you know enough to soak and high heat cook your beans and other high lectin foods. If you know to do that, that's known by your grandmother, but
Right.
it's not known by us who went to Cornell. They
We're
never
we're
taught
we're
us.
in modern USA. We're in the modern times. No one's going to soak anything for 3 days, and they sure aren't going to cook it under high heat under a pressure cooker. It just
That's
doesn't
right.
happen.
Including the factory that's prepared your can of beans.
Yeah.
And Chipotle and everybody else,
Right.
right?
Wow.
Who's really doing traditional preparation. Now, if you talk to Bill Schindler, he's the real expert in traditional preparation. And Weston Price looked at this too in his research. It used to be that everybody made plants safer to eat through sourdough. You would soak your grains, in teff, which is a grain, is quite high in oxalate and other problems. So to make injera in Indonesia, they have this very complicated, like 5 to 7 day process and make this very sour, flat dough, soft like a pancake that you use as your bread with dinner. It's a very complex. Why do they bother to spend nearly a week doing like 17 operations on this stuff? Because if you don't, you will hurt yourself.
Right.
But we've, in modern times, let the factories take our GMO modified whatever and do some quick process. In 20 minutes, they turn some new version of wheat that's never existed into a quick bread that they can produce like that. In fact, at Cornell, in our bread unit in foods class, we walked in with nothing and walked out with buns at the end of class. Like, how can you turn flour into, even I knew that, I didn't know you could make in an hour, you could come up with buns, but that's what we learned at Cornell. We didn't learn any of this stuff about disarming plant toxins at all.
So taking that another step further, how did you get here? Because the reality is, just like that picture behind you, and we hear the term superfoods, and we look at, and so the real quick list on oxalates, I'll let you give that. But when we hear those, they're so safe. We've eaten them for decades at will, at liberty. Bags of almonds. How many? I can tell you, I don't know how many. We all were probably in the same boat. Almonds are a great product to set in your cup holder and freaking snack on while you're on a road trip, and my God. And I don't want potato chips. Well, I know potatoes are bad for me, so I'll take and switch over to the sweet potato chips. Right? I mean, I'm just saying right. But it's just like, we're trying to be safe, but yet, and this goes back to, and I want you to address this as well, comes all the way back around full circle to what caught my attention with you, Sally, was Dr. Anthony Chaffee and him talking about what my botanist had told me years ago. Buddy, don't you understand? Do you understand? This is my botanist looking me straight in the face. He's like, do you not understand? Plants are trying to kill you. And I literally blew him off like he was crazy. And then Dr. Anthony Chaffee's talked about it, and many, many other doctors have said it. And then you're in that kinship because you've got such vast knowledge. You've proven it, but now you've written a book on it, that these superfoods, ladies and gentlemen, they're toxic. They're not good for you. So
we can boil this down really simply. Human beings spent 1 million years mostly in an ice age or a various set of ice ages, living on, like winter all the time. There was no such thing as a carrot back then, not the kind you think of. Most of what's in the produce department has been developed as a technology of mankind, and many of it only in the last 400 years or so. Some of it's really, now 400 years sounds long to you because you're, 35 or you're 58. I mean, to us, 400 years seems long. Of course, the older you get, the less long that sounds. That's not even a batting of an eyelash in terms of time. Everything's a new technology in our lives. There's hardly anything. Old technologies are ceramic dishes, maybe using a tortoise shell for a bowl, making seashells into jewelry, and doing leather jewelry and making stuff with leather, honing a knife. Now, those are old technologies, still really important. You couldn't get by without a sharp blade for very long. I don't think you last 2 days without a sharp blade in your life. And those are old technologies, but everything else, the carrot, the potato, these are all things we've developed. The corn on the cob, the new wheat, all the produce. I mean, a third of the produce aisle comes from a family we call brassica or cruciferous vegetables. They all came from mustard. They're the same plant, different shapes, different forms of it. And they have, different flavors and textures and different qualities chemically, but it's basically a human invention. There's no way that the things we invent are required for our survival. Right?
True.
So whatever we're being told, whatever kind of, it's almost like the authorities, whether it's the government or people in academic situations, are talking down to us like children and trying to tell us to eat our vegetables like parents. And you can see this in example with the carrot. Nobody liked carrots especially in Britain. People didn't eat a lot of carrots during the 2 world wars. And during World War II, the government made up a story to get people to eat carrots because they were running out of the other vegetables that people were more familiar with. They didn't have a lot of boats to import or money or resources to import a lot of vegetables because the boats were being used to fight a war with Germany, etc. Right? So they invented a story that the German bombers were being the Royal Air Force bombers were being quite successful at bombing German targets because they had great night vision. And you know what gave them the great night vision? Special carrots, children. Special carrots are winning the war. So go off and eat your carrots, darlings. And they did this whole campaign called Dr. Carrot. It's like a tooth fairy or Santa Claus story that we still believe in. We still think carrots are good for the eyes, but it was strictly wartime propaganda.
Wow.
And we don't realize so much of what we believe are some kind of moralist propaganda from philosophers, from ministers, from advocates, and from authority
just people with authority using their authority to push it over.
To push bran instead of alcohol, or whatever the agenda was.
So what
we're trying to be reformed in our bad ways of not eating carrots and being told to eat a brand new food because that's going to win the war, and that's going to becomes a psychological crutch. And we have this all over the map. So here we are now. It's the Christmas season. The sugar plum fairy is everywhere. Every single checkout is dripping in chocolate covered nuts.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
ripping. And then there's like the
when you said that, so I'm going to presume the darker the chocolate, the worse.
Yes.
So you take your dark cacao almond, and you're getting a double whammy.
Yep. And sometimes we put that all together with other newfangled things like taro chips and cassava, and like come up with these new combinations. And I don't put some turmeric on that while we're at it. It's like you could probably buy turmeric or curcumin laced dark chocolate almond bars. It's everywhere. Right. It's as if we're trying to kill ourselves. The plants are like getting a lot of cooperation from us. Literally, the plants, if they weren't toxic, buddy, they would be extinct. The ones who were benign and nice, they're gone. We ate them into oblivion.
See, it's the same as when you go back and look at history. The winners are the ones, the victors are the ones who write the history books. The ones that got conquered are dead. They can't write anything, and so, but when you say it like that, then all of a sudden it makes perfect sense. This is exactly what the freaking world is. The plant life is no differently. There's only the strong survive. And so here we are. We've really got the ones today that are kicking butt and taking names. So somebody asked what about acorn flour?
Well, so this is an opportunity if you really take time to let the oxalate story sink into your bones. So I recommend you read my book to really get a sense.
Know your book again. And this is not a little book, ladies and gentlemen. Look at this thing. She's put some work in there.
There's a bunch of stuff in here. There's a lot of references in the back. There's like at least 400 references, lots of pages of references in the back, lots of tables in here. There's a couple cool pictures of crystals in here too. Because
show one of them real quick. You've got to show an oxalate crystal that looks like something out of medieval times. I swear to God, it does. Yeah, look.
So
looks like, look at
the
that.
simple ones down here are just a simple toothpick shape. It doesn't have any fancy tips, and it doesn't have the groove in the middle that's designed to carry poisons. This is the one, this is called a rapide crystal. This is the one that are in, quote, edible plants like kiwi. These up here, there's many other shapes, there's like 4 or 6 shapes, different tip style. This is a tri-pointed tip. This is a single pointed tip. Both of these have grooves down the middle designed to carry additional poisons, because the crystal is like, this is a poison dipped arrow. And in that trough is soluble oxalic acid, proteases, and other plant chemicals, you know, some of which we've talked about. This one has little back barbs built into it. So when it punctures your 2 cells deep, it's staying there. And these cause the immune system to go bananas. And you get huge inflammatory reactions. And there's one plant that you may have heard of called dumb cane. And that's the Dieffenbachia. It's a house plant that you see in the malls. And back in the day when we all had indoor malls, Dieffenbachia was in every mall. It's an attractive plant. If you pop the stem of the leaf and you see this white sap, a dot of sap touches your tongue, you could end up in the emergency room for a week, unable to speak.
On that one plant.
Those crystals cause such a reaction that it literally causes so much inflammation that it shuts down the vocal cords.
Wow. So the acorn flower, I mean, I know people talk about
the acorn flower, yeah. So the point of that whole seeming diversion, is that the more ancient and native a plant is, the more it has its own toxic abilities, even better. It's like the ones that we're modernizing, many of them are a little bit less vicious. So all I'm saying is, just because it has this healthy glow, it's a traditional, like, wild food, doesn't make it any safer, because nature is rough.
Right.
Nature is tough. I mean, I have this fern plant out my window by my front door. The wrens love to nest there. Every year we have baby wrens trying to fledge. In 1 or 2 years, we had baby wrens being ripped to shreds in front of our very eyes because the crows got a hold of them. That's the nature of nature. Nature is kind of vicious. Whether it be a plant or an animal, everyone's trying to survive. And that's all the way life works. We have to accept that. It's not like, it isn't this little safe pink bedroom with music in it that we've landed in. We've landed in nature. We're part of nature.
Right. So the reality of it is, you can eat plants, but I think I know where you were going at the very beginning of this, and we kind of chatted about it. I'm not saying I as a carnivore, it's not a problem for me to stay away from them. But if you do enjoy plants, but the reality of it is, we eat too much of that today in a modern society, right?
That's right. And there's just 20 or so major foods that we really have to be cautious with. And then some are very low, like lettuce. It's not possible to eat enough lettuce to get too much oxalate out of lettuce. It's so low. Cabbage is really low. Those cruciferous vegetables that I talked about before, they're all really low in oxalate. Even most kales are really low compared to spinach, chard, and beet greens. That's it. Like in the greens department. Sadly, though, buddy, your average doctor is afraid of a low oxalate diet because it means you'll never eat any greens again. Well, no, actually, almost all greens are pretty low in oxalate, except for 3 of them, and sorrel. No one eats sorrel in the US. They do eat it elsewhere. But, that's the level of understanding that our medical people who have slight awareness of oxalates will say, oh, that's a dangerous diet because you won't get your healthy greens. Well, that's so wrong on many levels.
My doctor told me that about going carnivore. If I don't have any greens or any fruits or veggies in my body, he goes, you're going to end up with serious, serious issues. But yet I got the best cholesterol ever. I'm feeling like $1,000,000. I continue to lose weight. My numbers continually getting better. And all I'm eating is meat. I'm eating bison, and I'm eating elk, and I'm eating, whatever, beef. But
hopefully some fish too. I love to see people including fish.
Interesting of that. Here's a really weird thing that happened to me, is just for giggles. My wife and I did CGMs, continuous glucose monitors. Hers, she stays pretty decent. Me, on carnivore, my number kept going up. And I went and grabbed my genetics. I'm looking, 'cause I really like to look and see if I can find, I like to see if I can find correlations. I love to find if there's a correlation. I found if I eat too much protein, I'll convert it to glucose. So I have to, instead of eating, I used to eat 2 pounds of meat a day, and now I eat a little over a pound, but I still eat eggs in the morning. But meat, actual protein, I've got to eat less, but I can up my fats. So I'm more of a,
Despite the gallbladder.
right, I eat much more fat than people do. I
Yeah.
probably eat a stick of butter a day, close to it,
hmm
you know. But
hmm
but protein wise, I'm eating like maybe a pound, pound and a half, not even a pound and a half of like bison, but bison's really lean, right? And I find my blood sugar, I was having insulin issues with a lot of protein in my body. And I didn't think that could be possible simply because it's protein. But then when I overload my liver, that's just the way I am. So it's like when I go look at my genetics, it confirms some things, I tweak some things. It's not the same for everybody, just like oxalates aren't the same for everybody. But the
Well, let me
reality,
give you an idea about that, buddy, because
okay,
in the day when we were wild people living out in caves and running around having a good time and not worrying
yes,
about
ma'am.
paying the bills, we were hunters who liked dogs. We used dogs to hunt with, right?
Mhm.
Dogs were domesticated very early on. And they're so helpful because dogs can live on lean protein. They do beautifully on it. We want the marrow, the fat around the organs. We want a fatty animal. We want the organ meats. That's really what we were hunting more than anything. We want the brain and the heart and the liver and the fat and the viscera and the bone marrow. And so that extra lean meat would feed the dogs.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yep.
And so throw this in the mix, doing my genetics again, I'm 38% Norwegian, and in mine, it's like I do not I do not metabolize monounsaturated fat very well. I
Mm.
love the taste of avocados, but they give me terrible, terrible issues. But
What
I
about
can
pork?
eat, huh?
You tolerate pork? That's a
I
big
love
mono.
pork. I eat tons of pork. I can eat tons of
That's
pork,
very high in mono, unsaturated.
but right. So I had to back off the pork. I only have like 2 or 3 slices of bacon a day if I have that, but I'll have a lot of egg and then my beef. But the interesting thing is I have found if I throw 4 to 5 servings of salmon in a week, my body goes that Zen state. It's just like, and so my friend told me, he said, look, the fact is, I'm not trying to tell you you're a Norwegian, okay? You're far from it. You're a redneck from the South. That's what he calls me anyway, because he's in the North. And he said, but the fact is, you got 38% of your blood genetically, though, buddy, is Norwegian. He said it stands to reason that your body wants more of the homeland fare, which is not the stinky fish, but the good oily fish and oily products that come from that. You survive on PUFAs. And I didn't even know what a PUFA was, for God's sakes. It just sounds weird. But it makes sense that when we start trying to navigate this, nothing's the same for everybody. But in the middle of that, if I throw in some of your beautiful toxic superfoods, it really screws me up. But that's what I've been taught all my life. Here is this pyramid. Here's all, look at the produce section. Partake of whatever you want. And the reality is I can't do that. And there's many people I'm finding are in the same boat. They can't eat this kind of stuff.
Yep. Well, and think about fish, because human beings have always lived around water. You can't survive if you're not by a stream or an ocean. We love the ocean. We're all drawn to the ocean. Everybody feels better at the ocean side. And I think that human beings have made fish and seafoods a really inherent part of the diet, because even an 8-year-old can fish and pick up clams and oysters and crabs.
Oh, man. See, that sounds so good. It sounds good. It sounds good going and hunting for that, bringing it home. No differently than fishing. You're putting an action into, your meal. You're working for it. It's the reward part of it. So we got a question here that says, does your book cover polycystic kidney and liver disease? I know about oxalates, but I thought I needed low protein. Now what's left for me to eat? So I don't
I
know
have
whether.
seen polycystic kidney disease reverse with a low oxalate diet. Oxalate really is bringing out these genetic problems because it's so damaging to cells. And the number one toxin to the kidney is oxalate plus NSAIDs and some drugs. Those are not natural things,
Yeah.
but the drugs wipe out your liver, your gut, and your kidney. But really, if you haven't ruined your kidneys with the drugs, it's oxalate is really fundamentally has more power to be toxic and really bring out these problems. I have helped people with liver disease, polycystic, eat a very high protein diet. I think protein heals those tissues, honestly.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you've had your dose of toxic superfoods and you've pulled them out, let me ask you this, because you said something and I understand it, but I want to read our listeners and our people viewing, our audience. You don't just go cold turkey for most of us off of this stuff, right? It's not like, okay, I'm just going to go carnivore tomorrow and forget it. You may end up having some issues.
Yeah, because this is bioaccumulating in the body. So you remember I was saying it bioaccumulates in the liver and we don't even know how much is there or that it's happening because it's hard to measure there. Now, kidney stone is an obvious form of bioaccumulating oxalate. 80% of all kidney stones are consisting primarily of calcium oxalate. That same material is forming little deposits. Some of them are so tiny that they're invisible to any kind of scan or biopsy because they're nanocrystals, which are smaller than a cell. But they can grow in tissues because they tend to get hung up wherever cells have something going on. There's a sort of precipitate out from acid into crystals. I don't know if anybody remembers chemistry class, but you put enough of this substance into a liquid and you get too much and then it starts forming crystals and then crystals grow.
Sugar.
And in the body, the thing that makes oxalate grow into crystals are cell organelles, damaged membranes, inflammation, any kind of cell that's turning over, making a new cell, because cells have a lifespan. And it's like the gut cells have to turn over every day. You need new ones every day. When they're doing that replication and producing the daughter cell that will be the future cell, that's a point of vulnerability to the cells, a potential to be harmed by oxalate, but it's also a place where precipitation occurs. And so you start getting crystal formation around tissues that are recovering, that are injured, that have infection or inflammation. So if you just had surgery, if you just had a soccer game, or if you just worked all day, if you just got a burn, that tissue is where the oxalates start hanging out in your body. So it's very individual.
So for us, gallbladder arena, right?
The more damage you have in your liver and gallbladder, the more oxalate will collect there. So it becomes this vicious cycle of damage and collection and damage and collection. And this is happening in the thyroid gland. It's probably happening in the pituitary, in various parts of the brain. It's certainly ending up in your bone marrow, in your joints. So some of us have a very connective tissue picture where connective tissue is falling apart. Some people have just like a bladder problem where it's forming so heavily in their bladder and it just gets worse and worse with time because no one's told them, hey, it's actually your peanut habit doing that.
I'm blown away. Man, I'm sitting here just thinking in my head about how many people, they also try to correlate gallstones to kidney stones. There could be there?
Yeah, it's the same ingredient causing both.
Right.
Same with cysts. And they certainly coordinate osteoporosis with kidney stones.
So the calcium that's in my bilirubin stones is the same calcium that's in the system, right?
Yeah. So basically, when you eat the oxalate, it starts removing these minerals like it does in the vial. It's messing with the magnesium and the calcium and the iron in your blood. So now the body's like, well, I don't have enough calcium in the blood. So how does it can't have that. That's dangerous for the heart because if calcium drops and the pacemaker gets confused and you get arrhythmias and you can have a heart block, which is a type of heart attack where the electrical system shuts down from low calcium in the blood. So the body is very careful to not let that happen. And it turns on the osteoclasts that break up the bones so it can push out minerals, especially calcium, into the blood. So you start draining the reservoir of the minerals in your bones after every single meal, and it starts showing up as these calcifications, calcified tendons, stenosis, bone spurs, all this kind of stuff can be
wouldn't
because you got
believe.
too much calcium, because you got too much oxalate dissolving the bone. So if you end up with osteopenia, I think oxalate is the major cause of osteoporosis.
It's interesting because one of the biggest chief complaints that we see in the group is arrhythmia. They'll feel their hearts just like, they're like, man, do I need to go to the medical? Do I? Absolutely. I mean, I'm not going to tell them no. Go. Definitely if you got questions. But it's one of the chief complaints.
This is the reason why you want to go slow on the diet, because many people get this after they change their diet. Because this accumulation in the body is so eager to undo this mess. It doesn't want these toxic particles. So when you stop eating it, more oxalate starts coming out of your thyroid gland or your bone marrow or your joints back into the blood, and you get electrolyte disturbances that can cause blood pressure variations. You can get super high blood pressure and pulse, and you feel like you're having a stroke or heart attack. This is the electrolyte disturbance caused by the old crystals getting dissolved down and put back into the fluid.
So hear this. So I mean, I'm just spitballing as we go, because I'm thinking of what I've read and what I've seen in the group. Every single gallbladder client, not my client, just say patient. We don't eat 3 months before surgery. Well, you're usually on low extreme, because fats trigger the gallbladder to attack. So if you're having a major issue, you'll immediately, just psychologically, you'll shut off fats. You'll go low fat. Most of us, like myself, for the last 2 months, a good month of my gallbladder life, I'm gonna say with my gallbladder, I ate crackers and water. I could not stomach anything, thinking it's going to get better. Don't know
Mineral
why.
Deficient diet.
Right. So what I'm saying is, every person I know, every single person that deals with gallbladder issues, their diet has been, and I'm not going to worry about the pizzas and the stuff that got us here. But the moment the gallbladder goes to being a nuisance and it's time for removal, we all just shut down. We don't eat anything for months. Correctly. We're into starvation mode. And then we have surgery, and then we come out of surgery and we try to start eating again. And in the meantime, all of a sudden we got gut issues. See, I can see your mind's firing the same way. And it's just like, I think we're onto something. We need a spitball.
This happened to me when I after my hysterectomy, in the hospital, I just ate a few like raw egg yolks and stuff. And then I was home for several days. And then 5 or 6 days after the surgery, I was supposed to go into the doctor to get checked, the incisions. I had a total abdominal cut and they had me wide open. And that day I was so I felt like I had low blood sugar and dizziness, and I was just not right. And it was because I was now dumping oxalates. It takes about 5 days of zero oxalates, and you're dumping the oxalates. And the other thing is, they usually make you do movie prep before the surgery, which drains you of potassium and sucks out your electrolytes too. And then the oxalate starts flowing, and you don't have a backlog of electrolytes to deal with this disturbance, and you get all this.
And we've afforded it to malnourishment, malnutrition on the others, because I'll do a food sensitivity test, but one of them is a comprehensive nutrition assay, and we'll dive on 38 different vitamins and minerals, and they're always low. B vitamins, methylation's always gone to crap. D is just, very few people have decent D anyway. But this whole methylation cycle is just so screwed up, post-surgery. Well, really pre-surgery, but we find it post-op. But it never dawned on me that most of us, I'm going to say most of us, because y'all can crucify me if you want to, but I know you won't. But most of us have been eating that picture behind Sally because we thought it was healthy.
The sicker you get, you're like, okay, I'm going to reform my ways and eat healthy. The sicker you are, the more likely you are to go do green smoothies and green soups and
but I'm saying, we're eating that, and then we do have to have surgery, so we stop it. Or I say surgery, we get to a point where that's not working. But nothing's working, so I'm not eating. And when I stop eating, the oxalates
start coming
out. Then I get a dumping. And it's an oxalate issue that happens. And so another commonality.
Raises your oxalate levels in your body.
Wow. So another
Better move it
commonality is
around.
pseudo gout. Pseudo gout is rampant on that kind of stuff.
That's oxalate.
I got to have you back. We got to dig deep together and do some
Let's
research
keep talking
deeper.
about all of this metabolic breakdown that's caused by
This is
poisoning.
fascinating.
Being poisoned is the number one cause of illness. That and deficiency, and oxalate causes both. And it's an easy answer if people could just open their minds and hearts to actually looking at the facts and trying it out is
Right.
amazing.
And I'm not picking on vegans here. And she's not either. She's saying eat your veggies, eat what you can eat. Watch the ones that are the high oxalate lectins. All that I've dropped some lists in there in this event. I've dropped some pictures and stuff.
We can do a quick, there's bran and there's the quinoa, teff, buckwheat, there's the chia seeds, the hemp, the sesame, the almonds, cashews, and peanuts, the turmeric, the cumin, the kiwi, the star fruit, the blackberries and pomegranates. These are all like supposed to be so great. They're the problem foods. So we're not getting good information. There's not the entire food kingdom though, and there's plenty more to eat.
Right. Man, that is awesome. But boy, what a revelatory last 10 minutes that there is a correlated effect. That
no doubt.
Definitely, because hey, where do we get the book? It's on Amazon.
Anywhere. Please pre-order it now. The more orders we get before they give it to you on the 3rd of January, then we have a chance of a little bestseller bump that day. There's a lot of health books come out this time of year. All the publishers held this book and all the others until January, because now you care about your health because it's January. So
it's just like
now the media cares about your health. So we want this to be enough of a bestseller that people can discover it, because it's buried amongst all the other diets that want you to do juicing and nuts and paleo and keto and the books. Most of the other books are promoting these foods.
Juicing and celery kick and all that other stuff that people are doing.
They're still pouring out those books. So when people are looking for health answers in January, we will help them find the topic because we're buying the book and making it a little bestseller. So kind of like clapping for Tinkerbell. Please order the book as soon as you can, and feel free to order an extra one for your sister, neighbor, your doctor, because you're going to find yourself going, so-and-so needs to read this book. So help us get the message out. We don't have to have gallbladders cut out. We could save them if we quit some of this poisoning.
And that's what I think my next focus is going to be, because there's a lot of people do have sludge, and look, my gallbladder went bad. It was gangrene. It had stones in it. It wasn't going to get better.
You were rotting from the inside there, buddy.
Right. But I'm just saying, there's people that happens. But there's also people that are dealing with, I'm just going to be blunt, a poor diet, not realizing what you need to be eating, your DNA structure, what you can and cannot metabolize, all that combined, you might be able to reverse some things and make your life even better. But here, and this is what I will tell you that blew my ever-loving mind, because I'm one of them. And when you were talking about the beans a while ago, soaked for 3 days, cooked this way, lazy me. It's like I want to drive through Smoothie King and get my drink, and I want to drink my veggies, and I'm doing a good thing, right? Because why would they sell it as a health food if it wasn't healthy? And the reality is you're actually getting more oxalates, because there's a hell of a lot more spinach in a smoothie than there is in a serving side serving or a salad, a lot more. And you think you're being healthy, and the reality is it could be the worst decision you've ever made to do that kind of stuff. So wow.
Thank goodness the body knows how to heal. Once you get the right information, the body, if you're not well, that's because your lifestyle is not supporting your wellness. The body wants to be amazing, and it will go as close to amazing as you allow it. And this is one cool little secret.
I think it's like the secret of 2023. I think I'm going to promote you. I love your heart. I know what you're doing is resounding. I know it needs to be said. It needs to be shouted from all the rooftops. I don't think people talk about it near enough, and we just need to do more and more. And anything I can do to help, I definitely want to help you, because changing those foods out of my diet made a big difference. And I know if it made a difference for me, it can make a difference for everybody else. But the reality is oxalates are oxalates. And everybody has issues with oxalates. And so thank you. That's all I'm saying. Thank you so much.
You got it. It's so nice to find another disciple who's catching on. It takes a certain sharp mind to really pick up on oxalate. So
You're too sweet on that. It's like I see so many people suffering, so much suffering, and it's just like
at younger and younger ages, buddy. It's not just us 40 and 50-year-old decrepits. It's happening. Young girls, they're barely out of high school and they can't digest anything anymore.
I've seen you in your bikini. You're not a decrepit, okay? I've seen you in your bikini. You're not a decrepit, and I'm so. Yeah.
I actually have a lot of muscle development and muscle definition, but I do live on a high protein diet and I don't eat any junk food. And somehow that works. I'm not I do a couple yoga classes a week. I would love to have the time to work out. My inner me is probably a bodybuilder, but I don't have the time to do it. But for some, I'll be 59. I'll be 59 in March. So I'm just a year ahead of you. And I have much better muscle development than your average 25-year-old.
Right.
It's clean living does have its rewards, people. I know it seems so, not fun, but it is really fun to feel good. There's nothing more fun.
Absolutely. I feel better today. I tell everybody it's really interesting. And it sounds crazy, but my bowels, my everything, my digestion, after I got out of surgery and got back balanced, and saw the error in my ways, made the changes, I've lived better than I have the previous 50 years of my life because I always had digestive issues, always had major issues. I mean, from gout and all these other kind of things, made those changes. So I'm hats off to you doing what you're doing. You've converted me, you've converted other people, and anything we can do to make it better, we're going to do it. So Sally, thank you so much for today. And we'll chat soon.
Looking forward to it.
Okay, get the book anywhere. Hold the book up again. Well, there's a sign back there, but look how thick that is. The last thing I will say that I love about Sally, and I don't know her, but anybody that includes that kind of reference material in a book says, I know what I know, and here's the proof.
Library geek. I like logic and facts. And this is the small version of the book. If I put everything I know in here, it would have been twice as thick.
All right. Have a great day, and we'll chat soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.